Obviously, a lot of protesters and a lot of people around. You guys did an incredible job, so thank you for what you do. And I think that what we want to talk about today is how we need to have a law enforcement policy that is just supportive of the people who are actually keeping us safe. I noticed that we were in the room earlier. We did a little round table for the media to be aware of. We did a little round table, and behind us, I didn't actually notice it until I got up and stood and looked at it, were all of these photos of fallen heroes across the state of Wisconsin, people in law enforcement who had given their life for public safety. And I think the most important way to honor their sacrifice is to make the job of their brothers and sisters in arms easier, right? Why did they give their lives? They gave their lives for the basic idea of public safety, and we need a president, Donald J. Trump, who makes their job easier and not harder. We've got to cut out with the anti-law enforcement craziness. We've got to cut out with some of the policies that have come from the Harris administration that make it harder for the police to do their job. And let's just talk, thank you all, but let me just say a few words about the policies that have made it harder to be a police officer, and most importantly, harder for it to just be a citizen who wants basic public safety in this country. So Kamala Harris is on a tour where she's trying to redefine her record as a tough-on-crime prosecutor. And yet if you look at Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor, it is the opposite of tough on crime. For example, Kamala Harris pursued a policy that would recategorize people who had committed sex crimes with minors and people who had raped unconscious victims as nonviolent crimes. And what does that mean? That means those people get out of prison earlier. That means their victims have to suffer the psychological abuse of seeing them walking around our streets sooner. And that means the police officer have a few more sickos that they have to take care of instead of being in prison where those sex offenders belong. If Kamala Harris was so tough on crime, why is she making it easier for sex offenders to get out of prison? I think the media should ask her that question. Of course, Kamala Harris refuses to answer questions, but this is important stuff. I grew up in a family where we didn't have a whole lot of money, and I was raised by a tough-as-nails grandmother who, despite the fact that we didn't always live in the easiest neighborhood, we had something that our country believed every child deserved. Whether they were rich or poor, our country believed that every child deserved public safety. And as Republicans, we don't think the government should do everything, but the things that it needs to do, it has to do well, and public safety is at the very top of the list. How can you have a country? How can you have an American dream? How can you have poor children who look to the future with optimism and hope if they can't walk down the streets of their neighborhood safely? And these police officers fight to make that a reality every single day. And Kamala Harris is making their job harder, and Donald Trump is going to make their lives easier. That's why we're going to reelect him the 47th president of the United States. Yeah. So let me just offer one final observation here, because so many of these issues are connected. So many of these problems are obviously linked to one another. And talking at the round table with the police officers and the sheriffs really drove that point home. So I talked to one sheriff who lives about an hour away from downtown Milwaukee. And even though he lives an hour away from downtown Milwaukee, he has Mexican drug cartel members who have been doing business, selling drugs, and harming the citizens of his community. When you hear Republicans say every state is a border state, that is not just a slogan. That is a sad reflection of the reality that we have drug cartels operating about as far north in this country as we possibly could. What a disgrace. You hear people talk about arresting illegal immigrants and how the illegal immigrants completely run away, refuse to obey the commands of law enforcement. Well, why? Why do they completely refuse to obey the commands of law enforcement? Because they got into this country in the first place under the promise that law enforcement wouldn't stop them and wouldn't enforce the law. So the border policies that we have at the southern border, they make our communities less safe, even as far north as Wisconsin. It means Mexican drug cartels operating in our communities. It means people dying of fentanyl. I talked to another police officer who talked about we have fentanyl not just in heroin and opioids and even prescription pills, or I guess non-prescription pills that are sold on the street. We've got heroin and we've got fentanyl in our marijuana bags that our teenagers are using. And look, I'm the parent of 3 young kids. My wife is here, and I'm thrilled to have her join. We've got a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. We don't have to worry about this yet, but I'm certain, because kids are kids, that one day one of my kids is going to take something or do something that I don't want them to take. But I don't want that mistake to ruin their life. I want them to learn from it. I want their parents to be able to punish them. I don't want our kids to make mistakes on American streets and have it take their lives away from them. That is in some ways what this fentanyl crisis has done. Normal American teenager mistakes have become death sentences because Kamala Harris refuses to do her job. And I think it's time for all of us to say to Kamala Harris, you want a promotion? You want a promotion after your record as vice president? We think you ought to be fired, and that's exactly what we're going to do come November. Thank you all for being here. To the police officers, to the police officers, we support you. We love you. We know it's not easy to be a police officer. We know we're losing a lot of good people from the force. Some due to retirement, but some, they're just sick of all the garbage. But I'd ask you, keep at it for as long as you can. Keep doing this important work, because there are a lot of us out there who are grateful for it. In about 6 months, your job's going to become a hell of a lot easier. God bless you guys, and thank you for having me here in Wisconsin. So, what we'll do here is we'll take a few questions from reporters before we get on our way. And what I would ask is we'll get to the national reporters if we've got time. But if you're a local Wisconsin reporter, either in the Milwaukee area or outside of it, maybe start there, raise your hand, and I'll call on you first. So we got anybody? Ma'am, in the yellow dress.
Hi there, I'm Julia Fellow with 620 WTMJ. So glad that you're here. I was just talking to the president of the Milwaukee Police Association just yesterday live. He was talking about how there's 200 openings, and then there's going to be maybe 60 to 70 more retirements that are happening. But our city can't afford to keep up with what should be, that they allow, about 1,700 officers. And when we talk about detectives, it should be about 175, he says. We're down to like about 130. Yep. And then also, on top of that, the Milwaukee County leaders are talking about the sheriff's office, that we're dealing with a huge budget deficit. How are we going to meet that budget deficit? $7.2 million in overtime he was talking about with the deputies. So we're talking about money here.
Sure.
Who's going to pay for it? And also we're trying to get people, to be recruited. So how is the Trump organization going to pay for that and support that? Because detectives, for example, we had a local situation, Sade Robinson. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was a terrible case. She was going on a date with her boyfriend, and then she was cut up in several pieces, and it's horrible.
Ugh, it's awful.
Part of her body was found in Illinois along the lakefront. Her family's really upset. But there's only so many detectives to go around with other cases. Like, we have so many carjackings that are going up. This is a real issue, but how are we going to pay for it? How is your organization going to pay for that?
So let me give you a couple answers to this question, because it is, unfortunately, this is a story that I hear all over our country. A lot of police departments can't recruit the people that they need to keep us safe, and it's only going to get worse unless we fix this problem, and Donald Trump and I promise that we are going to fix this problem. First of all, you hear from police officers, and I've heard this story today, but again, I've heard it from all over our country. A lot of the reason that it's hard to recruit police officers right now is because our leaders have attacked the police for so long that a lot of people just don't want to do police work anymore. That is the first thing that leadership needs to change. We need to make it clear that we want good people, we want good police officers, we want the very best to join the American police forces all over our country, because unless we have the best people becoming police, public safety is always going to be a fantasy and not a reality. So let's have leaders who support the work of police, not people like Kamala Harris who put the police down and make their life harder. That's number one. But second, when we talk about money, first of all, when we talk about scarce municipal resources, and I know a lot of towns and municipalities are dealing with limited resources, we have to ask ourselves, why are the resources scarce in the first place? And a big part of the reason is that we are spending millions of dollars housing, sheltering, and providing medical care for people who shouldn't be here. Those are the people who have come in across Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. When you take millions of dollars that should go to our local police departments and you put it in sheltering and providing medical care for illegal aliens, it is the least in our community, the least of these in our communities who suffer the most. It is innocent children who need cops to keep their streets safe. It is innocent poor people who need municipal services to work, and they are the ones who suffer the most when you have a wide open southern border. That costs money. It costs a lot of money here in Milwaukee, and it is a big driver of scarce resources. So what I would propose is you have a federal government that supports our local police, that you get the illegal aliens out of this country, and you free up precious budgetary resources to hire some police and focus on public safety. One final point on this is I think to the point about making police officers' lives easier, one of the weirdest things that exists in American public policy, and I didn't realize this until a couple years ago, I was a United States Senator. I have sponsored legislation to fix this, and I know President Trump agrees with me. Police officers are actually penalized because they don't get the same access to their Social Security benefits as most American workers, because effectively the way that it works is the dollar that goes into their pension is taken out of their Social Security. So you're basically penalizing our police officers, taking away their Social Security when they want to get to retirement. I think if we stopped that, it would make it easier to recruit some police officers. Do the police officers out there agree with me? Stop that double taxation of benefits. I think so. And when I talk to police, I know that's a big driver. But look, unless we stop making the business of policing in this country so miserable by having our leaders attack the police, we're always going to have a problem recruiting the right people into police work. Any more, sir?
Senator Matt Smith from WISN-TV here in Milwaukee. Coming off just of everything you just talked about, it seems like some allies of former President Trump have said in recent days he needs to focus more on policy, just like you talked about, less personal attacks. I'm curious, have you had that conversation with him, and does he need to pivot, especially when you look to swing states like Wisconsin?
I don't think the president needs to pivot, and if I told him that, I can guess what he'd say. I think that the reason that President Trump has been so successful connecting with Americans is even when they disagree with something that he might say, they know that he just is who he is, right? I'd much rather have a political candidate who I disagreed with 25% of the time, but was a real human being and was willing to speak off the cuff, than to have somebody like Kamala Harris who hides behind a teleprompter and doesn't speak to the American people directly unless she's got a script in front of her telling her exactly what to say. I think the unscripted nature of President Trump is one of the reasons why his campaign gives a pretty good insight into the kind of president that he's going to be. Now, that said, we are focusing a lot on policy. We're here in Wisconsin today talking about public safety. I was in Pennsylvania yesterday talking about veterans issues. I was in Michigan the day before talking about how we have to stop the trade and energy policies that ship all of our manufacturing jobs to China. When Donald Trump was president, 12,000 American factories opened. The previous 2 terms, 60,000 American factories had closed. So we are talking about the policy and we're talking about the issues, and we're going to keep on doing that. But my only advice to my running mate is be yourself and let people see who you are, and I think he's doing that every day on the campaign trail. Anything else?
Jason Calvi with Fox 6 here in Milwaukee. Democrats are criticizing your visit here to the police union. They say, you know, your running mate is a convicted felon. They also point to January 6th. Your reaction to that?
Well, look, I think that Kamala Harris has weaponized the Department of Justice, not just against my running mate, not just against President Trump, but against a whole host of normal Americans for just exercising their First Amendment rights. I mean, not maybe the most significant scandal, but certainly a very large scandal is the Department of Justice went after a pro-life Catholic father of 7 for exercising his right to peacefully protest. The Department of Justice showed up, the Department of Justice leadership had officers show up at this guy's house and treat him like a common thug for exercising his right of First Amendment protest. And I think that every single police officer here would agree with me when they say that we want a strong Department of Justice that focuses on law enforcement. Why don't they focus on shutting down the drug traffickers at the southern border and the sex traffickers and let Americans exercise their First Amendment rights? That's not what the leadership of the Department of Justice should be focused on, but unfortunately, under Kamala Harris, it has. So I think that we are clearly the party and the movement of law enforcement. You talk to the field guys in the FBI, the people who are actually on the ground dealing with the bad guys, and they're as frustrated with their leadership as we are. We just want American leadership to empower law enforcement to enforce the laws. It's going to make us all safer if we do that. Any other local Wisconsin folks? And if not, I'll take a couple from the national pool. Okay. Sir.
Senator Vance, Chris Cameron at the New York Times, you were talking about the relationship between crime and immigration, and my question is on that issue.
Please.
In an interview when you were running for Senate in September 2021, you were speaking with Jack Murphy, and you were talking about previous waves of immigration to the United States. You said the following: you had this massive wave of primarily Italian, Irish, and German immigration, and that had its problems and that had its consequences. You pointed to these problems as being higher crime rates, ethnic enclaves, and inter-ethnic conflict. Should the United States have prescribed similar policies to what you're proposing now, including mass deportation, to deal with those issues?
Well, first of all, I also said there were a lot of benefits to that wave of immigration, but has anybody ever seen the movie Gangs of New York? That's what I'm talking about. We know that when you have these massive ethnic enclaves forming in our country, it can sometimes lead to higher crime rates. What we want is an American immigration policy that promotes assimilation, that no matter where you come from, you can become an American, but only if we have an immigration policy that promotes assimilation instead of doing things like what we've done over the last few years, which is have 25 million illegal aliens just setting up shop here with no control, no enforcement, and no real ability to police what's going on. That is a disaster. And in fact, what we did back in the early 20th century is that we recognized, and I think that we have to do that today, we recognize that at a certain level, America is a welcoming country to immigrants, but can only take so many people. We cannot take the entire world into this country, and I think that we're at a stage right now where we have to say we've got to slow those illegal immigration levels to zero. We do have to deport some people who have come here illegally, and I think that will promote assimilation and a common American culture that's in the best interest of everybody. Look, I'm married to the daughter of South Asian immigrants. One of the reasons why I think that we have such a wonderful and successful marriage is because we both very much feel like America is our home, like our children belong here. What happens when you have massive amounts of illegal immigration, it actually starts to create ethnic conflict. It creates higher crime rates. We've certainly seen that over the last few years, and I would like to stop it, and I know Donald Trump would too. Sir.
Thank you, Senator Vance.
Ma'am, sorry.
It's okay. A new ABC Ipsos poll was out today. It shows that Governor Walz, Vice President Harris's running mate, has a higher favorability among Americans than you do. What's your response to that poll? And also, what can you do ahead of the October debate to try to win over more Americans and your campaign?
Well, look, I don't put much stock in polls, especially at this early level. I think Governor Walz was nominated just a couple of weeks ago. He's received a ridiculous media honeymoon where they've hidden, a lot of press have hidden some of the things that he said and done. I mean, this is a guy who actively encouraged rioters to burn down Minneapolis during the summer of 2020. It's the biggest city in his country. And then, of course, his running mate, Kamala Harris, was offering to bail those rioters out of prison. I think when people know the truth about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, their anti-crime record, their pro-criminal record, the fact that he let rioters burn down the largest city in Minneapolis, I don't think his approval ratings are going to be that high, and I think that Donald Trump and I are going to win this race. But that's what the campaign is about, right? We have a little bit less than 90 days to make our case to the American people, to persuade them that our policies are going to make their lives better. And again, I think you contrast the failed leadership of Kamala Harris with the peace and prosperity of Donald Trump. I don't think there's any doubt we're going to win this race, but we've got to run the campaign, and we've got to get out there and talk to people. That's what we're doing every single day. Maybe do one more. Any other Wisconsin people that haven't asked a question?
Hi, my name is Graham Kilmer.
Sir.
I'm a reporter with Urban Milwaukee. You mentioned fentanyl. Here in Milwaukee, we have a fentanyl and overdose crisis that began and really got worse under the first Trump administration. So what would you do differently the second time around?
Well, look, I think if you look at the actual data, the fentanyl crisis really, really took off under the leadership of Kamala Harris, under the border czar policies where she opened up the southern border, where fentanyl got completely out of control. And you talk to our law enforcement officers, and they will tell you that the fentanyl problem has gotten way worse in the last few years than it was at any previous time under any previous administration, Democrat or Republican. Now, look, we have an addiction epidemic that's been long-running in this country, and I think more than any president in my lifetime, Donald Trump actually implemented policies to try to get this addiction problem cut down on. I mean, if you look at the number of overdose deaths and how they went down during Donald Trump's administration, and you look at Kamala Harris's administration where overdose deaths have skyrocketed, I think it's very easy to say, like so many other issues, the record of Donald Trump is one of success and American prosperity. The record of Kamala Harris is one of failure. Any other questions from Wisconsin press? Okay, so we'll do one more then.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. I wanted to ask you, Trump has been getting attacked from his comments at the press conference yesterday about what he said about the top military honor. And veterans have pointed out, he said that the civilian presidential honor is better than what wounded veterans have received. And I wondered, what do you say to veterans who think that's demeaning?
Well, look, I was with a group of veterans in Pennsylvania yesterday, and trust me, the veteran community is very, very much behind Donald Trump. So, look, what I would say to people is, look, what President Trump said during a ceremony, and I haven't seen the entire remarks, but my understanding is President Trump said during a ceremony that a person who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he was saying some nice things about her. He was saying some complimentary things about her. Donald Trump, I've seen give out a Congressional Medal of Honor. I've seen him give out a number of awards and commendations to military veterans. And of course, I myself am a Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War. This is a guy who loves our veterans and who honors our veterans. I don't think him complimenting and saying a nice word about a person who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom is in any way denigrating those who received military honors. They're two different awards, and I think the president was saying some nice things about a person that he liked, and that's a totally reasonable thing to do. All right, so with that, before we close here, I want to bring up a couple of law enforcement officers just to say a couple of words. And we have, first we have Alexander Ayala. And Alexander, come up and say a few words if you would. Thank you. And Alex is going to talk, and then our next guest is also just going to talk about some of the law enforcement challenges and some of the ways that if we have better policy, we can actually make this country a lot safer. Go ahead, Alex.
Hi, my name is Alexander Ayala, and I'm the president of the Milwaukee Police Association. I am a 24-year veteran of the Milwaukee Police Department. Senator Vance, thank you for being here to amplify our message that our members provide the highest degree of service to our community. We like to say that the Milwaukee Police Association is the force behind the force, and we use the words honor and service when we talk about our brave men and women of our department. Their importance extends far beyond the uniform and the badge, and it's about their commitment to serving and protecting us and protecting all of us. The challenges of policing in the city of Milwaukee are many. Low bail for dangerous criminals, the need for honest and concentrated efforts to pursue those offenders wanted on bench warrants, low officer morale, and an often anti-police society, rushes to judgment in officer-involved shootings, not to mention the staff crisis that requires officers to spend more time away from their families. Some areas of the city will at times go with only one squad to patrol the entire area of 44,000 citizens. As squads get pulled to other parts of the city to address high priority calls, which can often be more violent in nature, that requires more officers. The Milwaukee Police Association believes that the solution to these challenges can be found right here. That's why the MPA is endorsing the presidential ticket of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, because addressing these issues isn't as political, it's truly a matter of life and death to Milwaukee. So thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. Great. And please stay up here, Alex, but I also want to have Andrew Wagner come up. Andrew was just recently retired as a career law enforcement officer, but he told me his wife has already put him back to work. So, Andrew, I appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Yeah, I got a day of retirement in, so I appreciate that. Thanks. But no, I 27 years serving Milwaukee and the citizens of Milwaukee, and what I have seen in the last 4 years, the denigration of officers and the loss of officers' morale. We had 1,700 officers at one point here. We're under 1,300 officers now. And with that drop in numbers, we saw a spike in homicides that over doubled our homicide rate. And then we saw a drop in those clearance rates. We had a high of clearance rates in homicides of 80, 90% clearance rates. That is down to almost 50% now. You think about the victims that are not being duly served by this police department and police departments across the country because they can't have staffing because of the defund movement. We had 200 detectives in our bureau. We're down to 125, and we have double the amount of homicides. I mean, you do the math. We can only keep up so much. So what we have seen with the support from President Trump when he was in office and when he looked at our cities, when Kenosha, for instance, had riots, he sent federal troops in there. He made sure that somebody had the officers back. And I can't be more supportive of this administration and President Trump because I know we have a partner in him, and I know he will always have our back. So thank you very much.
All right, guys. So with that, I want to thank the media, but especially the law enforcement officers for being here. Thank you so much for the endorsement. It means the world to have the support of the people that are fundamentally making it possible for our police officers to do their great work. I'm so grateful for it. I will say before we go that for the first time, Ush and I decided to bring our 9-month-old German Shepherd on the road with us. And if you know what a German Shepherd looks like, you know that he looks like a police dog. So we're about to hit the road, but nobody kidnapped my dog because we want him back. God bless you guys. Thank you all. Good to see you.